The knock came just after midnight. 3 soft thuds, hesitant, uncertain, and trembling. For a long moment, Daniel thought he was imagining it. His house sat on the edge of a small, quiet town in Montana, where the nights were long, the air cold, and visitors rare. He had been sitting by the fireplace, staring at the flames, letting the silence drown out the noise in his head. But when the second knock came, slightly firmer this time, he felt his heart jolt. No one ever came this late, especially not after what had happened last winter. He stood, the wood floor creaking under his weight, and moved toward the front door. The wind howled outside, shaking the old shutters, and as he opened the door, 2 figures stood shivering on his porch. They couldn't have been more than 20, their faces pale under the porch light, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. One of them clutched a torn duffel bag. The other had her arm wrapped protectively around her. They looked fragile, lost and broken in ways Daniel recognized instantly. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, take a second right now to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Because what happened next is something that will remind you that humanity still exists, even in the darkest of nights. Daniel's first instinct was caution. He had learned the hard way that helping strangers could tear your life apart. But something in their eyes, something desperate, raw, and real, made him pause. "Please," one of the girls whispered, her voice cracking. "We didn't know where else to go." Her name, he later learned, was Samantha, and the younger one beside her was Lily, her sister. They were half frozen, their clothes damp, their shoes covered in mud. The younger one looked barely 16. Daniel stepped aside silently, letting them in. The warmth of the fire hit their faces, and Samantha broke down instantly, covering her face with her hands. Daniel didn't ask questions at first. He handed them each a blanket and poured 2 mugs of coffee. The girls sat by the fire, trying to steady their trembling hands. Only after several long minutes did Samantha begin to speak, her voice shaking. They had been driving through the interstate when their car broke down miles away. With no phone signal, no money, and the temperature dropping below freezing, they started walking, hoping to find help. But that wasn't the full story. As the night unfolded, Daniel realized these 2 girls weren't just lost travelers. They were running from something or someone. Samantha hesitated before revealing the truth. They had been living with their stepfather after their mother passed away 2 years earlier. What began as a strained relationship soon turned into something cruel and unbearable. The man was violent, unpredictable, and manipulative. One night after he raised his hand against Lily, Samantha decided enough was enough. She packed what little they had, took her mother's old car, and drove. They didn't have a plan. They only wanted to survive. Daniel sat silently as they spoke, his jaw tight, his heart heavy. Their story struck something deep within him. He knew what fear felt like, what helplessness could do to a person. Because once, not so long ago, Daniel had lost his own daughter to an abusive household after his marriage fell apart. He hadn't been able to protect her. He hadn't been there when she needed him most. The guilt had eaten him alive ever since. As the girls spoke, the memories clawed their way back. The court order that kept him from seeing his daughter, the last voicemail she'd left him, the sound of her crying on the phone before her mother's new boyfriend got involved. Then one night, she was gone. A car accident, they said. But Daniel never believed it was an accident. He had lived every day since with that hole inside him, unable to forgive himself, unable to move on. Looking at Samantha and Lily now felt like looking back through time, like being given a second chance he didn't deserve. Over the next few days, Daniel let them stay. He cooked breakfast in the mornings, showed them how to use the wood stove, and helped fix the old heater in the guest room. Slowly, the girls began to relax, though Samantha still flinched whenever someone spoke too loudly or moved too quickly. Lily, on the other hand, was quieter, always drawing or writing in a small notebook she carried everywhere. It wasn't long before the authorities came knocking. A local patrol car stopped by one afternoon, asking about 2 missing girls from the next county. Daniel froze, unsure what to say. He didn't want to lie, but the thought of those 2 going back to that monster of a man made his stomach twist. When the officer left, Daniel knew he had a choice to make. That night, he sat by the fire again, staring at the flames while the girls slept in the next room. He thought of his daughter, of all the nights he'd sat here blaming himself for being too late. And then he realized something. Maybe this was his moment to do what he couldn't do before. To protect, to guide, to give someone the safety he'd once failed to give his own child. The next morning, he packed his truck. "We're going to the sheriff's office," he told Samantha, who immediately panicked. "No," she cried. "You don't understand. They'll just send us back." Daniel shook his head gently. "Not this time," and he said, "I'll go with you." "You're not alone." At the station, Daniel spoke for them. He explained everything. The abuse, the escape, the threats. At first, the officers were skeptical, but Daniel's calm, steady voice carried weight. He was known in town, respected. A retired carpenter who had once worked with the local community center, he wasn't the kind of man people doubted easily. When Samantha broke down describing what they'd been through, something shifted in the room. The sheriff promised to look into it. They arranged temporary protective custody for both girls until a hearing could be scheduled. That night, Daniel came home alone for the first time in a week. The house felt empty again, but something had changed. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. He had done something right, something good. But just when he thought the story would end there, life had other plans. A few weeks later, Daniel received a call. It was Samantha. She told him they were safe, staying with a foster family in the next county. The case was being reviewed, and the stepfather was under investigation. She sounded stronger, hopeful even. But then she said something that caught him completely off guard. "We wanted you to know, we found something in the car, under the seat. It was a photo of a little girl, your daughter. Her name's Emily, right?" Daniel's heart stopped. He hadn't seen that photo in years. It was taken when Emily was 8, smiling with ice cream on her face. "How did you—" he started, but Samantha interrupted. "The photo had your name on the back. It must have fallen when we borrowed the car from a neighbor before we ran. The neighbor said it used to belong to a woman named Susan Miller." Daniel's breath caught. That was his ex-wife's name, his daughter's mother. He couldn't speak. His mind raced, connecting pieces he didn't know existed. The car the girls had fled in, it had once belonged to his ex-wife, the same woman who had vanished years ago with his daughter after the accident, the same woman whose boyfriend had taken everything from him. And suddenly, a horrifying, beautiful realization hit him. These two young women had somehow, unknowingly, crossed paths with a piece of his past that had haunted him for years. The weeks that followed felt surreal. DNA tests, reports, endless questions. Then one afternoon, the phone rang again. It was the sheriff. "Daniel," he said, "you might want to sit down for this." They had found new records, buried adoption files, guardianship papers that revealed something extraordinary. Lily wasn't just Samantha's half-sister, she was Daniel's granddaughter. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. He sat there staring out the window at the snow-covered fields, tears running down his face. All these years he'd prayed for a second chance, and somehow, through a chain of impossible coincidences, life had brought two lost souls to his door, souls that carried a piece of his own blood, his own story. When he finally saw them again, months later, after the court settled everything, Samantha ran to him, hugging him so tightly he could barely breathe. Lily stood beside her, smiling shyly. "Grandpa," she whispered. That one word shattered every wall he had built around his heart. Daniel's house became warm again after that. The laughter returned, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, the sound of Lily's pencil scratching across paper as she drew by the window. They started rebuilding, together. Samantha enrolled in community college. Lily joined art classes. Daniel even went back to volunteering at the local youth center, helping kids who'd been through rough starts. He had found purpose again, not through luck, but through love. And sometimes, late at night, when he looked at the same door where it all began, he would think about that first knock, the sound that had woken him from years of silence. The night two frightened young women showed up, changing everything he thought he knew about loss, redemption, and the quiet ways the universe heals us when we least expect it. If this story touched your heart, please don't scroll away. Like, share, and subscribe to keep spreading stories that remind us that kindness still matters, that broken things can be mended, and that sometimes strangers are the very angels we need most. Before this story ends, I have one small request. Comment below. What would you have done if two strangers knocked on your door that night? Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can rewrite the biggest story of your life.